wanted to share with you an idea that's a very simple idea, but it's quite a profound idea and maybe a controversial idea, and maybe it might even make a few people get a bit of a hostile reaction to tonight. But don't worry, I'm going to explain to you why that hostile reaction exists and why this idea, if when fully implemented and fully understood, can actually not only solve all the great challenges facing our species, but in my opinion is actually the only idea that can. So what's the reason this idea is controversial is because it challenges one of the most fundamental precepts of our society, which is trade. Now, we all kind of more or less accept trade as being the de facto way of operating our society, so much so that we even see it as like some kind of universal law. But it might surprise you to know that actually that trade has only really existed in relatively recent years. 90% of our modern human history, we didn't actually trade at all. There shows no archaeological traces of trade. And what actually, in those early sort of tribal or agrarian communities, what actually happened was that there was like an implied understanding that everyone in the tribe just looked after each other. And this was how the tribes operated for perhaps the vast majority of our early human history. So we see trade as obviously now as a very important way of doing business, and you have to say, well, the trade works that I get what I want and you get what you want, and we all go home happy. But when you actually scratch the surface a little bit more of actually how trade actually pans out in the real world, it's not such a nice story. It seems to be more a better theory than it is than actually works out in practice. For example, the most obvious case is like about 3 billion people in the world today live on $2.50 or less a day. Many of them much, much less than that. And obviously they have like racked with starvation or dying from curable diseases. So I mean, you have to ask yourself, is trade really working for them, for those people? Clearly it isn't. And the next thing is the debt. We can bring the whole problem of trading much closer to home. We don't have to talk about the third world to see the problems. And this is basically a minus banana. Have you ever eaten a minus banana? Well, I'm sure you haven't, and I certainly haven't, of course, but chances are you have bought a plus banana with minus money. So it might surprise most of you to learn that actually the vast majority of our trading society, which is founded on money, is actually founded on debt. All new money basically enters into society through loans made at banks. And most people don't actually know this, but if you go to a bank and borrow your 100,000 euros, that 100,000 euros is practically typed into existence there and then. It's not, they don't take it from the safe to give it to you. So the result of all that is, and then they have all that this huge amount of personal and public debt in the world. The result of all that is we have like nearly a quadrillion dollars worth of debt, global debt in the world. Okay, so this is like $32,000 for every man, woman, and child here. So does that really sound like something that's working? No, I don't think so. And there's also the whole destructive power of trade as well, because obviously this desire to create relentless value and economic growth all the time inevitably breeds irresponsible and antisocial behavior. So, like for example, you can cut down a whole forest or frack a whole mountain or exploit a whole village of people and actually make a huge amount of money from doing that. So you can get incredibly wealthy by exploiting others of the misery of other things on the planet. So obviously this kind of this profit imperative basically overrides other sensibilities, which are obviously in the long term they're not good for us. And then of course, much closer to home again, like our own well-being and our own mental health. This is something that maybe a lot of people in the room can even relate to. I mean, how many young families and young people have been crippled with enormous financial strain, literally just trying to have a normal and decent life? And how many people have suffered anxiety or depression or alcoholism as a direct result of trying to, not being able to adequately provide for themselves or their family. So, I mean, with all these problems with trade, it doesn't seem like such a pretty picture. I mean, is this really the best that we can do? To exist in this sort of law of the jungle, sort of eat or be eaten sort of state of mind, and just like fight for crumbs of social justice, within those narrow parameters. Is that really the best we can do in the 21st century? I don't think so. I think we can do a lot better. One of the reasons, one of the things that I promote is something called an open access economy, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute because I think that there are alternatives to trade. But first I want to do a little thought experiment. For example, if we say that we're not going to trade, if we say that trade is a bad thing, we don't want to do that anymore, what is the alternative? What could possibly replace trade? And so I just can put together a little thought experiment. What do you think would happen if everything was free? If we didn't have to pay for anything, we didn't have to earn money, what do you think would happen if everything was free? Do you think maybe it might be something a bit like this? Yeah, unfortunately, there's Black Friday. Unfortunately, yeah, pretty much this is the way we more or less think, that when you make things free, that people go stir crazy for that sort of stuff. But is that really the full story? Is that really the full story? Because I don't think so, because maybe this would happen if you announced like free TVs for everyone. Maybe this will happen on day 1 or day 2 or day 3. But what will happen on like day 30 or day 300? I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine people still bashing each other to get TVs, to get their hands on their TVs. I mean, wouldn't it just become a fact that all TVs were free? Wouldn't it just become something that we would just accept quite normally? So, I mean, if you needed a TV, you just go down and you get one, and you don't need no handbags or blunt instruments required. So, if we accept that maybe our perceptions of how people would respond to free TVs is maybe wrong, and maybe the next question obviously becomes then, okay, so where do all the free TVs come from? Where are they going to come from? So, what I would say to that is, if you imagine that you lived in this hypothetical world with all free TVs for everybody, would you consider volunteering a tiny portion of your time towards helping produce and make those TVs for yourself and your neighbors? Let's say, for example, you were asked to work 6 hours every 6 months, for example, to help produce TVs for you and your neighbors. Would you do it? I think I would, and I think most people would. And when enough people do that, then that's where all your free TVs come from. So it's literally a combined voluntary effort. And of course, it's so easy to make things like televisions now because we have this great technology which is almost printing the damn things now. You just put them out like that. So it's very, very easy to make and produce a lot of the things that we need and that we use. So, I'm not just talking about televisions, of course. This is just an analogy, but what if we could provide all of life's basic necessities for free? And shouldn't this already be a thing? Like in the 21st century? Shouldn't we actually already have access to the means of living, like to water, food, shelter and clothing, energy and communications? We've got this super connected society, we have self-driving cars. We've got robots on other planets. And yet we can't seem to organize something so simple as free food or clean water for everyone on the planet. And these, our most basic bodily necessities are ignored over exploration of other planets. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. So I think that with a little reorganization of our priorities and the way we operate on this planet, I think this is eminently doable to actually shift the way things, and it's obviously a big shift in terms of values. What I'm talking about is an open access economy, which is basically a way where we all contribute our own resources, skills, and time towards meeting the needs of our society and our community. And it's really not rocket science. It's not anything that's superbly original, but what it is it's the way our ancestors used to operate, that underneath this implicit understanding that everyone looked after each other in their community or in their town or in their country or world or whatever. So this open access economy is something that I think that can bring us from this competitive system into a system where everyone is cared for, obviously, and we have this amazing technological capability, and we can expand our things without all this needless stress and suffering and death that literally comes from our enforced trading system. It's something that we have self-imposed on ourselves, this thing that we must trade, and the only way to break free of the damage of that is to actually start shifting our own values and opinions. So at the heart of the idea is basically volunteering. And what do we know about volunteering? Well, we know quite a lot. Like, for example, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, is like the single largest, biggest volunteer organization in the world. I know because my wife works in there. And they have 100 million volunteers in the world. That's over 1.5% of the world's population, volunteering, working for nothing, often in dangerous conditions. Then you have the smaller charities like your cats and dogs homes, your homeless shelters, your cancer secondhand shops, and the Coast Guard, lifeboats, mountain rescue. You have all these massive, loads of millions of, volunteer organizations, which probably add up to several millions of people planet-wide, of course. And then, of course, you have the open source community. You have Linux and Android, Chrome. These are all software created by people just because they get a kick out of doing it. And these are hundreds and thousands of volunteers. Wikipedia, of course, is one of the most trusted content sites in the world, and it's basically written all by volunteers. So I mean, we seem to have this idea that volunteering is kind of very much the exception, and to do things you have to trade, but actually it's not, and it's actually more the rule than it is the exception. The other thing is the caregivers and homemakers in the world, mostly women probably, they amount to billions of people. It's maybe a quarter or 2/3 of the planet are basically people who are absolutely devote their entire lives to the service of other people. So if you actually removed all volunteering from modern society, it would be a very, very bleak situation indeed. So the open access economy then relies on volunteering, and we already know that volunteering is actually much more effective than we are led to believe. And if you imagine that all these people volunteering, they're all doing it within a social system that expressly disincentivizes their doing so. So, I mean, for example, if you're volunteering to do something, you're actually taking away time that you could be working in a job, earning money, creating personal wealth for yourself. So by volunteering, you're actually impoverishing yourself. And yet billions of people do it anyway. So what is that telling us about human spirit? Maybe we have things wrong here, that actually we do have this really strong innate desire to be productive, to be valued in our community, to be helpful, to feel useful. I think we all have this, and almost everyone I know has it. I mean, of course there are people who are malingerers, or people who aren't interested and lazy. Of course there are those people, yeah, but the vast majority of people, they want to get up out of bed in the morning, and they want to be productive, they want to do things, and that's fine. Now, what if we could actually incentivize volunteering instead of actually disincentivizing it like we're doing now? For example, if you imagine here, this the guy on the left here, you need money to live, and we all say money is a great motivator, and it is. And so there you go, you need money to live, it's going to be the biggest part of your motivation. But of course you have other things like enjoyment and meeting people and improving yourself, helping the community. These are all incentives as well. So what happens when you take away the money to live? Well, of course, the other incentives are going to grow. They're going to fill that space. We're not just going to lie down and die because you don't need money anymore and say, oh, I'm not getting out of bed in the morning. we're going to basically improve our incentives, and that's going to improve our whole value system. So, like I say, it's basically the open access economy is like it's a whole different shift in our value system. So, what I would propose is that if you want to look more about that, you can Google about open access economy. But a lot of people ask me, how do we actually get there? How do we create this super open access economy? And of course, the answer is very simple, but it's not necessarily fast or easy. The answer is that we have to start shifting our values and habits today in small ways, that moving towards that way of thinking, that volunteering, looking after your community way of thinking, and away from the sort of the isolationist sort of trading way of thinking. And there's lots of ways we can do that. There's lots of tools online now where we can actually help by volunteering, and you can share your goods and services with other people. You have sites like Free Worlder or Helpful Peeps, Simbi, there's a few others. There's Kindista and Peerby, Street Bank, a few other ones like that. There's all these tools actually exist, and these things are growing now because a lot of people are thinking the same way as I am, and there's like a huge growing group of movements basically who are also starting to think post-monetary, post-market system, because that is the future. That is where we need to get to, and the way we're operating now is actually holding us back. It's making us sick, it's wrecking the planet, and it's basically keeping us more or less in the dark ages. So this is it. The open access economy is something that where we all basically contribute our times and skills. We leverage all the best technology that we have available. We use the best of technology. We combine it with like modest community effort, and basically create a better world where we're all much more connected to each other and connected to the planet, where we create abundance for everybody, and we create amazing technological possibilities just by changing the way we act. And there's a really good example of changing our habits and actions in our own lifetimes, and that's recycling. Like, for example, 30 years ago, none of us knew anything about recycling. We were just chucking things in big black bags and forgetting about it. But now, over time, we have basically, with mass awareness campaigns, we have changed the way our habits. We separate out our trash, even though it's not really in our personal interest to do so. But we're more conscious now. We're more responsible about our trash and how we operate and that sort of stuff. So that is really, for me, it's a very strong analogy of how we shift value systems and shift priorities away from one set of behavior to another set of behavior. So that's it. I think this is how we're going to base the open access economy, by moving away from the trading system and into a more compassionate and collaborative system. I don't think it's going to solve all the problems in the world, but it might just solve 99% of them. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for listening.